For our first topic today, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has recently pushed for a new investigation into the origins of COVID-19, pressing China to provide full access to a second team of COVID-19 investigators. The first team in 2020 was sorely disappointing for outside observers interested in the truth, with the team of investigators being substantially reduced at the last minute, and as well as the scope of their investigation being drastically reduced. Miles, it's been a long road from the outbreak of COVID-19 to today. Initially, there was a lot of speculation regarding its origin. You yourself led the earliest investigation into the outbreak at the State Department. And since then, we've seen innumerable reports released from various organizations, both within and outside the U.S. government, claiming different conclusions. Could you walk us through, in as much detail as you're interested in providing, what the earliest investigations were like? And with regards to this recent announcement, is this call for an investigation simply too little too late? What does the WHO hope to gain?
WHO's chief is trying to redeem himself because his entire career in WHO as a chief was owed to the China's vigorous push. So he was very appeasing to the Chinese, begging them, and then once China declined, he just, did a great job. I mean, the first investigation was a farce. The investigators were not even allowed to go to Wuhan. And eventually, 2 people were allowed to go there, but for like 24 hours. And they were not even allowed to get anywhere close to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the primary suspect of the leaking. And then they came back and wrote a report saying China did a great job. So right now, obviously, he's facing a lot of storms. So hopefully, he's redeemable. This whole scourge of COVID is so devastating to the world. China behaves like a hooligan. And it just did not really want to cooperate. Not only that, China blamed others for districts and Australia and Italy. So for all these other things, China has no shame and no moral qualm to reject such an important international investigation. When Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison mentioned politely China should allow investigation of no bias, China basically retaliated Australia by banning import from Australia of its wine and its coal. So this is just really unforgivable. China's obsession with virus study all started in 2003 with the SARS outbreak. That outbreak spooked the Chinese government. So there are 2 consequences. Number one, they have this massive nationally mobilized research drive for vaccine for such viruses like SARS. Secondly, the Chinese People's Liberation Army see the potential of the virus weapons. So they were really interested in developing these virus weapons. As a result, since 2003, there had been an enormous procession of the world's most deadly viruses inside China. According to China's own statistics, in a 12-year span since 2003, China has discovered or synthesized in the labs close to 2,000 viruses unknown to mankind. Now, let's put this into perspective. For a span of 200 years before 2003, the entire world had only known the existence of about 2,000 viruses. So this kind of great leap forward type of, really craze in China. With that many deadly viruses in China's possession, therefore, you have the terrible problem of biosafety. China's biosafety standard is abysmal. In 2003, SARS viruses escaped from Chinese CDC labs, causing fatalities. Throughout all these years, there is a severe lack of training and lab management standards in China. There's been widely alleged that the Chinese labs, including its P4 labs with the highest safety standard, keep selling lab animals, used animals, to local markets and wet markets. Wuhan Institute of Virology is at the center of this biosafety crisis. Yes, the French helped build this lab, but the French were kicked out of any supervisional and maintenance role after it's finished. No supervision, no international investigation. Its own director, lab director, is the foremost expert on biosafety, and he has been consistently worried about it. He keeps writing articles about how terrible Chinese biosafety is. So first of all, you mentioned about my role in the previous administration in investigation in the initial stage of the source of the of the COVID, and I did comprehensive research of all the open sources. And Wuhan Institute of Virology's behavior before, during, and after COVID outbreak all point to its culpability. Yet, the international community and the expert community were totally banned from accessing WIV. So all information points to one conclusion, that is, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is guilty, 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 and China can no longer stall it.
Do you have confidence that this investigation in particular is going to help give us any of that conclusive evidence? Is it too late to get that conclusive evidence, or are we simply going to be left to wonder?
China is on the path of being a global pariah state. Its behavior about COVID origin is absolutely abhorrent. And its behavior toward the war in Ukraine by taking side with Russia is also abhorrent. So if China wants to continue to be the pariah state, then I don't think we're going to have any prospect of finding the bottom of this virus. But I hope Chinese leadership realizes this, and it keeps saying it wants international respect. I mean, this is the beginning stage. It wants to be respected by the world. You have to behave respectfully.
I want to ask you a broader question than we usually cover. There are several camps or schools of thought in Washington regarding the U.S.-China rivalry. There are some who argue we are in a new Cold War with China. But on the other hand, there are those who would say that this sort of rhetoric is needlessly escalatory, or that the historic parallels simply fail to offer us sufficient guidance. Miles, as an expert on China and an accomplished historian of the Cold War, I wanted to pose this question to you, which I really think breaks down into three questions. That is, what is a Cold War? Are we in one with China? And why does thinking about it this way matter?
I think we should really get rid of the bad habit of playing the semantics game. All the words capitals. Cold War, New Cold War. Let's just look at it. To answer your first question, what is Cold War? The Cold War we experienced in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even early 90s. You normally would have three key components. Number one, for the Cold War to exist, you must have a mutually hostile ideology with the intention to destroy each other, the two camps. Number two, you must have a mutual destruction capabilities so that both sides would be averse to kinetic direct confrontation because we're mutually destructive. Therefore, you would have to conduct a different kind of a warfare that is cold, not hot. That is number three component. That is the large number of proxies on both sides. You use your proxies to conduct your strategic objectives, right? Let's just look at U.S.-China today. China certainly has the intention to destroy the U.S. because the very existence of the powerful, free, democratic United States provides enormous inspirational impact on the Chinese people. And if every Chinese citizen wants freedom and democracy, the CCP will be finished. So, as every CCP leader has said, from Mao to Deng to Jiang to Hu to Xi, the rivalry between China and the United States is an epic struggle of life and death. It's a 你死我活, you die or I live. Because the model of free and democratic governance led by the United States must be dead so that the CCP could live. As simple as that. For the United States, we are gradually understanding this CCP strategic intention of a zero-sum game. And more policymakers have passed the point of aversion to talking about regime change in China. Because if the regime in China is not changed, the CCP regime will change and is changing the free world. So as simple as that. So therefore, you have to really measure whether it's Cold War or not. Definitely, the first criteria of a Cold War, you must have a mutually hostile ideology with the intention to destroy each other. Definitely, this is a new Cold War. Secondly, when it comes to capabilities, the gaps are narrowing. The CCP is developing weapons and technologies that can kill us not only kinetically, but also kill us softly through cyber, space, artificial intelligence, big data, espionage, and the powerful tricks of the United Front that focuses on brainwashing and mind-bending of the young, the naive, the greedy, and the disenchanted of the West. So definitely the capability gap is narrowing. So for that reason, definitely there is a Cold War in existence between China and the United States. Number 3, China is fast developing its own circle of friends and proxies all over the world. You name it. China has been really, really working hard to develop its own alliance systems, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and through BRI system and develop its circle of friends in all continents. So the bloc votes at the United Nations led by China is also very important. So that's why you do have this kind of emergence of two camps, two blocks of there. So all 3 factors considered, it is in essence a new Cold War between United States and China. But it's a new Cold War with the unique characteristics. Number 1, unlike the Cold War in the past, when both Soviet Union and United States fought each other in long distance and separately in its own safe space. There was a Warsaw Bloc, there was a NATO system, and they were totally separated. The new Cold War between the United States and China is much like close-range hand-to-hand combat, or even wrestling. In other words, it's intertwined, because China has been allowed to massively infiltrate into the West in general, into the United States in particular, with the cultivated class of China lobby in Wall Street, K Street, and the think tank roles in Western capitals. You can see the very peculiar phenomenon. Speaking for China in the West, are many self-seeking, unprincipled former government officials in Beijing service, self-important, intellectually dishonest scholars and academics, disenchanted misfits and radical lunatic French on the left, on and off university campuses that embrace Marxist utopian authoritarianism, denounces democratic capitalism as systematically evil and alienating. So this is unthinkable during the Cold War of the past. It's decidedly different from the Cold War with the Soviet Union. At the time, there was very little of this kind of CCP United Front infiltration in the West. I might also want to add that unlike the Soviet Union, whose satellite system of states mainly came as a result of military conquest and outright ideological export, the CCP's way of developing satellites and proxies all over the world is through a gigantic trap of economic and technological dependency, after which the CCP hopes to export wholesale its communist model of governance that's being practiced inside China, with a total surveillance system, complete deprivation of human and individual rights, total subjugation of individual dignity and personal freedom to a Marxist-Leninist police state. So, but all in all, it's a new Cold War with the CCP characteristic, if you will, but a new Cold War nevertheless.
For our last topic, we spoke recently about the new economic corridor that was announced at the G20, spearheaded by India, which will seek to link India, the Middle East, and Europe through a series of infrastructure projects and trade initiatives. We heard something similar about 10 years ago, actually on the date, when Xi Jinping traveled to Kazakhstan and Indonesia and announced the Belt and Road Initiative. 10 years out, how has that project fared? What differences between India and China might help this one fare better? But perhaps this points to a more fundamental question, which is, it seems India is seeking to supplant China as the leader of the global South or the developing world. Do you agree with this characterization? And if so, what do you make of that development? What will that look like?
Well, I think India definitely has a potential to be the leader of the global South. China does not have the capability and credibility mostly. And don't forget, the fundamental difference between India and China is that India is a democracy which can produce a legitimate government and a capable leader, while China is an illegitimate regime where its Marxist-Leninist leadership is constantly in a state of regime legitimacy paranoia over its own people's potential revolts or protest. So, India, despite its historical and cultural legacies, India, as a maturing democracy, has shown its tremendous advantages in developing a modern country with a rapid economic takeoff, a cutting-edge space and electronics industries, highly educated and innovative and huge middle class whose property rights are constitutionally protected, None of this is happening in China because it's a communist country. It's a non-market economy. There is no constitutionally guaranteed property rights. But more importantly, India has both the credibility and potential as a leader of Global South, as I mentioned earlier, or the traditionally called the non-aligned countries. Mostly, recognize India as the leading country in that category. China has extremely little credibility in assuming global leadership because the CCP cannot be trusted. None of its neighbors, including even its all-weather partners, Pakistan, and its communist brothers, Vietnam and North Korea, have any kind of a deep respect for China. As a matter of fact, you talk about most of the countries along China's borders, including its communist neighbors, Vietnam and North Korea, harbor deep hostility and suspicion of the CCP. Because CCP has been known historically for its high degree of strategic opportunism and imperious hubris. So that's the problem China is facing. So I don't think China is going to beat India in the competition for global South leadership. I simply cannot see how China could assume the leadership role of Global South. President Biden is correct recently when he endorses India's entrance into the UN Security Council as a permanent member to end China's bizarre and ridiculous role as the sole representative of the non-Western Global South in that august body. To answer the question, I think India has great potential precisely because it has a very big systemic difference from that which is China.